Welcome to another lab. In this one, we're going to get started with Google Cloud Storage. So in this lab, we are going to create a standard bucket. We're going to use the developer console, the web UI, to do that, but I'll also show you how we can do that using GSUtil, our command line utility. Once we get that up and running, we are going to modify our Guestbook App Engine application to store data inside of that bucket. Let's begin. Once again, you can access the lab materials here by heading to content.gcptrain.org. Just make sure you've logged in using the account that you're registered for with this course. Choose Google Cloud Platform Fundamentals in the left-hand nav. And our lab docs here for this lab are going to be the Module 10 lab, getting started with cloud storage. Also, you can download the lab code down here. It'll give you a zip file full of all the projects for all the code for this course. And you also have your lab command reference file up here, so you can copy and paste the commands we'll be using from the SDK to do things like deploy our application and manage our resources up there in GCP. Here is the lab doc. So we're going to modify the Guestbook application to use a cloud storage bucket that we're going to create here shortly, and it will put data inside of that bucket. Now, it's still going to use the data store to read and write its information, but on our writes, it's also going to create a file in cloud storage. So this lab will take you about 30 minutes, and we're also going to spin up our Compute Engine Labs instance, and we'll use the SDK from there. But some other things we'll be doing here is, of course, deploying that application to App Engine. We'll enable the Cloud Storage API, and then we'll create a Cloud Storage bucket and use that Cloud Storage bucket to view the objects that are placed in there whenever we put an entry inside of the Guestbook application. So I think we're about ready to go here. Let's start by getting into the developer console and creating a bucket. So here we are in the developer console at console.cloud.google.com. Again, make sure that you have the project that you are working in here, ours is CP100 selected, and then we want to head down to cloud storage. I pinned a shortcut to it in our previous nugget, but again, you can find that here in the products and services drop down right here in storage. Now to create this in the web UI, inside of the browser, you're going to hit create bucket. We're going to give it a bucket name. Again, this needs to be globally unique across all of cloud storage. So I'm going to do CP100 dash, let's call this guestbook. So we'll do a GB there, dash, how about, I'm going to put my initials in here. GS, there we go. Hopefully, yep, that's good. Otherwise, you'll get a little message down here saying that's not globally unique. So make sure you name that accordingly, and then choose a storage class. Here are our storage classes, standard, DRA, and nearline. Let's choose standard for this bucket. And then we have our location. So here's your multi-region location, which will span all the regions in that location, or you can choose a regional location. Let's go ahead and choose, I'm going to choose US East 1 because that's where all my stuff is. That's also where my App Engine app is living. So again, this will ensure that our App Engine app is close to the data inside of our cloud storage bucket. All right, so let's go ahead and hit create. That's going to spin up that bucket, and when it's ready, we'll see it here inside of the list. There it is. So it actually put us right inside of that bucket. So at this point, we could upload files into this bucket. We could upload a directory of files. We could also create a folder. And this, again, just kind of a logical item, because any objects we put in that folder will have the name of that folder and a WAC appended to the name. Remember, this is one big flat namespace inside of here. So we simulate folders through the names of objects. We can refresh, and if we have objects in here, we can put checkboxes next to them and share them publicly, which will grant access to that all users special scope identifier, which essentially means we're sharing it to the world. And anybody that has access to the URL can access the object. Now, if we head back a level here to buckets, we can manage permissions on the bucket as well as object permissions by hitting this little drop down here. So let's hit this drop down. Here's bucket permissions, and we can also edit our default ACLs for the objects within. If we hit edit bucket permissions, this is going to pop up a little dialog. Here is the URL to our bucket, and here are the default permissions right here. So owners, editors, and viewers. Owners and editors get owner access, which allows them to create objects inside of the bucket. And then we also have readers, which allows them to view objects inside of the bucket for the viewers on the project. You can also add an item here, and you can see you can add it for a specific domain, group, or user. And again, you can use that special identifier, or you can just click on the link, which will do that for you to expose it to the web. Now let's fire up Cloud Shell here. And while that's firing up, let's head over to Compute Engine and fire up our Labs instance as well. So I'm going to scroll down here to our Labs instance, put a check next to it, and hit start. And when that's ready, we will SSH right onto that instance. Now, another thing I want to show you here is how you could create that bucket using GSUtil. Here's what it would look like. GSUtil MB for make bucket. Then we could specify the classes, say nearline. We can specify our location here, and we could just say, I'll do the same thing, US East 1. And then we need to give it a name. And I'm just going to do this as, I'll put test in there. Obviously, this is going to fail because I'm sure somebody has the bucket with the name test out there already. But one thing to notice is this GSUtil is an older utility. I imagine at some point in the future, this will get wrapped into our G-Cloud utility and we'll have something like G-Cloud Storage. But you can see just working with it isn't as consistent as working with things like G-Cloud Compute, where we have full-blown names. Rather than, G-Cloud Compute instances create, we have GSUtil MB. But check it out right there. Service exception bucket test already exists. But I just wanted to give you a taste of what it looks like here to work with GSUtil. So it looks like our CP100 Labs instance is ready to go. There it is. So let's do a G-Cloud Compute SSH CP100-Labs to get us right onto that machine. Choose 12 for the zone here, and there we go. And we've got the SDK on this machine as well. So the first thing we're going to do is clone that Git repository, which contains our App Engine app, only this time with cloud storage code on the server side. Well, let's switch directories and just take a little peek inside of there. And everything is pretty much the same, except that we have this cloud storage directory, and that contains the client library for interacting with cloud storage. That contains all the modules and everything we need to reference from our server side to interact with cloud storage. Let's take a peek at that file. I have it locally here in Sublime, and if we head down in here, you'll notice that we are referencing the cloud storage client library right here as GCS. We've got our bucket name here, so we're going to need to edit this before we upload our application. We'll do that on our VM and put our bucket name inside of here. We've also got some default retry parameters, so if something goes wrong with the upload, it'll use these parameters to retry it. And if we head down here, really the only thing that's changed is right here in the post. So when somebody enters an entry inside of our guest book, it's still going to do all that data store stuff. But on top of it, on the right, it is going to generate a file name in the form of bucket name, whack, and then whatever the date is that is on the greeting. So whenever we created the entry. And then for the content, it's going to extract the data out of that content property on our greeting entity and put that inside of the file. And then it's going to call this function down here, self.createFile, and here is the definition for that file. So it's going to set up some retry parameters, and then it's going to do a gcs.open. Passing in the file name, it's going to be a write operation, it's going to be a text.plain content type, and we've got those retry params from above. Then it will actually write the file, write the content to that file, and close it. And that's it. So it's just going to create a file in GCS every time somebody creates an entry in the guest book. So back onto our labs instance, we need to modify the name of our bucket inside of our guestbook.py file. So I'm just going to do a nano here and use whatever text editor you're comfortable with. So we're just going to head down and find that entry, which is near the top of the file here, so we should be pretty easy to find. And leave the quotes in here and just add your bucket name instead. And my bucket name is right above there, CP100-GB-GS. Once you're done, hit Control X and then Y for yes to save the changes. Hit enter to close the file as well, and then just to make sure that the change is stuck, just cat out that file and make sure that it changed, and mine did. So we're good to go. Now we're ready to deploy the App Engine app. So we'll do an app-config.py, pass in an A to overwrite the application ID inside of our app.yaml file, pass in an update, pass in the path to our app.yaml, which is in the current directory, and then you may or may not need to authenticate. Once we hit enter, it'll either walk you through the authentication process or it'll upload it to App Engine if you're already authenticated, and we should be good to go. So what that'll do then is overwrite version 1 as mine did. Now, if you want to keep separate versions of these applications per lab, make sure you edit app.yaml and change your version to something like 1-storage so you know which lab it's referencing. So now we should be able to head into App Engine, or you could just fire up another tab there and go to projectid.appspot.com. You can also get to it pretty easily here just by going to your dashboard in App Engine and finding the URL over on the right. That'll fire it up in a new tab, and we should have Guestbook ready to go. And notice, if you haven't done anything to your data store, it'll have all the entries from the data store lab still in here because it's still reading and writing to and from the data store. So we should be able to enter something in here and it'll work. One thing I do want to point out though, and I know our cloud storage API is already enabled from a previous nugget, but you will want to make sure that your API for cloud storage, the JSON API, is enabled. And you can do that by heading into API Manager. Let me just minimize Cloud Shell here. And you can head over to Enabled APIs and you can look. And look at that. We do have Cloud Storage JSON API ready to go. And this is where you would disable it if you wanted to. So we're okay. Let's head back to the Guestbook application and let's do a hello from GCS. Hit Submit. And that should create the entry in the data store as well as create it inside of cloud storage. Let's just do another one here. GCS rocks. I had to. You know it. All right. So there it is. Now if we head back to storage here, into our browser, into our bucket, we should have 2 files. Awesome. So now if we click on these, it should fire it up right in the browser, and there is our content. Cool, right? There's our objects with our data inside of them. Now you can manage these files in bulk by managing the checkboxes over here. You can share them all in one shot. You can delete them all in one shot. You can also manage them individually. We have build buttons over here for managing permissions and metadata. I'll show you that in a second. And you can also share it publicly, individually, by clicking the checkbox next to it. That'll give you a public link, and here is the URL then that you can share to the world so they can access your objects inside of your bucket. Now, if we hit the drop down and hit edit permissions, here's where you manage object permissions. So check that out. There is that special identifier, all users, that was added by clicking on that public link. So it added the user, added that special token, and then I gave it read access. So anybody in the world has read access now to this object. Another thing you can do is edit metadata. So here's metadata for this, which we defined when we uploaded the application, the content type. You can also edit all this other system metadata, such as cache control, or you can add your own key value pairs in here as well, so your developers can programmatically work with these objects. And that's about it for this lab. Cloud storage is an awesome product, and it's incredibly easy to work with. Now, don't forget, if you did spin up that labs instance, to spin it down. So head back into Compute Engine, put a check next to it, and hit that stop button. There we go. In the CBT Lab Nugget, we saw how to get started with Google Cloud Storage. We saw the process for creating a bucket in the developer console, the web UI, as well as creating one using GSUtil, our command line utility installed with the Google Cloud SDK. We also saw how to work with it programmatically through the API inside of an App Engine application. And finally, we saw how to work with our objects inside of buckets. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.